Imagine something rotting inside you, deep within your flesh. Not just aching, but decaying. You feel life draining away with each feverish pulse, the source of this slow death hidden so profoundly, it's unreachable. It was with this feeling that, in 1735, an 11-year-old boy named Hanville Anderson was brought to St. George's Hospital in London. He had a hernia, but that wasn't the real problem. The child was burning with a pain no one could explain. And then, the surgeon Claudius Amand, looking at his patient writhing in agony, decided to take a leap into the absolute unknown. He picked up his scalpel, ready to enter a living body and confront an enemy that didn't even have a name yet. The scalpel's incision revealed more than just a hernia sac. Inside, amidst the putrid mass, Amand discovered what had yet to be named, an inflamed, swollen appendix, pierced through. Pierced by an ordinary pin the boy had once swallowed and forgotten. This pin had punctured the intestinal wall, and now pus mixed with intestinal contents oozed from the ugly wound, poisoning the child's body from within. And then, before his assistant's eyes, the surgeon excised the affected section. All of this under the boy's inhuman screams, without a single drop of anesthetic, on a crude table in an 18th century hospital. But who was this surgeon who dared such a feat? Claudius Amand was not a native Englishman, raised in the traditions of London colleges. He was a Huguenot, a refugee whose family had fled France due to religious persecution. His most important lesson wasn't learned in the quiet of libraries, but on the battlefields of Flanders, serving in the British Army. There, amidst groans and the smell of gunpowder, he had seen hundreds of times what steel could do to a person. He had seen ruptured abdomens and knew that poultices and prayers wouldn't save someone whose internal organs were ablaze. War taught him a simple and brutal rule. If something is rotting inside, it must be removed. Don't wait for the poison to spread throughout the body. Cut out the evil at its root. And now, looking at this small boy, he saw not an unknown illness, but a familiar enemy. An enemy that could only be defeated with a scalpel. With forceps, he carefully, as if disarming a mine, extracted the pin, a tiny rusty nail in the boy's coffin. The air in the room was heavy with the smell of illness and fear, but the surgeon seemed not to breathe. He worked quickly, his movements honed by hundreds of amputations on the battlefield. Taking a simple silk thread, he passed it under the base of the appendix, at its very attachment point to the intestine. The knot tightened, blocking the path of blood and poison. And then, one sharp, precise flick of the blade. The affected organ was detached. Amand held in his hand this small, ugly clump of flesh that had almost killed the child. At that moment, something more significant than just a risky operation occurred at St. George's Hospital. For the first time in history, a person didn't just open an internal abscess. They tore out the very cause of the disease, the very root of the decay, from a living body. He didn't heal the wound, he destroyed its source. And in this lay his entire genius, simple as a soldier's bayonet. You see, any other doctor of that time would have seen fever in the belly. He would have prescribed bloodletting to release bad blood or poultices to draw out the heat. He would have acted according to books written hundreds of years ago. But Amand didn't read those books. He read wounds. His war-hardened mind discarded all that pretense. He didn't see a mystical illness. He saw simple mechanics. Here's a pin, here's a hole, here's pus. And if there's a hole, it needs to be mended, and everything that has rotted around it, cut off. This wasn't medicine in the lofty sense of the word. It was a repair, brutal, crude, but the only correct repair of the human body, as if it were a broken musket. But repairing muskets was the work of artisans, not gentlemen. And Amand's main enemies were precisely them, the eminent gentlemen of the Royal College of Physicians. Men in powdered wigs whose main instrument was not a scalpel, but a quotation from Galen, pronounced in impeccable Latin. They didn't see pus and a perforated intestine. They saw a disruption of the sacred balance of the four bodily humors. For them, illness was a philosophical problem to be solved elegantly, with leeches, laxatives, and intricate diets. And then he appeared, a refugee, a soldier, a man without classical education, who went into a belly with a knife, as if opening a bag of rotten potatoes. For them, this was not treatment, but barbarism, an act of desperation, capable only by one who doesn't understand the true, elevated nature of medicine. But this barbarism worked. The boy, Hanville Anderson, survived. A month later, he was running through the streets of London, having completely forgotten about both the hernia and the rusty pin that had nearly sent him to his grave. And in this was Amand's main triumph, his silent answer to all those gentlemen in wigs. Their elegant philosophy would have killed the child. His crude craft saved his life. But the surgeon went further. He didn't just save a patient. He meticulously described his case, with the pin and the excised appendix, and in 1736 he presented it to the Royal Society. He brought his barbarism directly into their temple of science and laid it on the altar. Living, breathing proof that sometimes, to save a life, one doesn't need to quote the ancients, but simply to pick up a knife. And what did this temple of science do upon receiving proof that was breathing and running through the streets? They politely listened, carefully recorded it in the minutes, and forgot. For almost 150 years. Because Amand didn't just perform an operation, he performed a revolution in consciousness for which no one was ready. He transformed colic, a vague diagnosis that could mean anything, into a precise malfunction of one specific organ. He transformed peritonitis, a deadly fire in the abdominal cavity, from an act of God into a solvable surgical problem. And most importantly, he transformed treatment from an attempt to affect the entire body into the targeted removal of a single source of evil. But for them, it was just a curiosity, a whimsical story with a pin and a boy. They saw an exception to the rule but didn't understand that Amand had just written a new rule, with blood and steel. For his main weapon was not knowledge, but rather fortunate ignorance. He was not poisoned by the wisdom of the ancients, which in his time was deadlier than any venom. While London's best minds sought a disruption of universal harmony within the boy's body, he saw the same thing he saw on the battlefield. An enemy had breached defenses and was building its festering stronghold inside the fortress. And against such an enemy, what was needed was not a Latin incantation, but sharp steel. His genius lay not in knowing how to cure, but in not knowing that it was impossible to cure.